A November to remember in the Russell 2000 as it soars over 18%. The key drivers and market leaders in the Russell 2000. The Russell 2000 is the best representation of the U.S. economy, and why the Russell may now be the new bull market leader. All this today and more on the Futures Radio Show podcast with Director of Product Management at the London Stock Exchange Group and FTSE Russell, Catherine Yoshimoto. Futures Radio Show is sponsored by CME Group. They are the world's leading and most diverse futures and options exchange. CME Group's markets help individuals and businesses around the world effectively manage risk. For access to free educational tools and resources for the active individual trader, please visit activetrader.cmegroup.com. For new show notifications, please subscribe to Futures Radio Show podcast on iTunes, YouTube, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or Stitcher. This show is also sponsored by Trading Technologies, RJO Futures, and FTSE Russell. The Russell 2000 is a key benchmark for small cap U.S. stocks. Be sure to check out the E-Mini Russell 2000 futures symbol RTY and Micro E-Mini Russell 2000 futures symbol M2K. To learn more about FTSE Russell and their products, please visit FTSERussell.com.
I'm a Director of Product Management covering our equity indexes. So that means that I work with our clients and also our internal teams on, making sure our indexes are delivering to our clients. And I cover primarily the Russell US indexes as well as the FTSE Global Equity Index Series. I also cover our real estate indexes, the FTSE NAREIT and FTSE EPRA NAREIT indexes. I meet regularly with clients to find out what they're interested in terms of new product development, also, any enhancements that we should be making to our indexes. Love generally talking about our indexes. I've been in the industry for 18 years of financial services. Before joining Russell, what was Russell at the time, about 10 years ago, I came from the active manager space. After joining Russell and now FTSE Russell as part of London Stock Exchange Group, we talk a lot with not just our active manager clients, but also our passive managers, and also, now increasingly our derivatives system, the ecosystem. Our indexes are used across a wide variety of audiences. So I get to talk to a lot of different types of parts of the business within the industry.
That's great. And I'm glad to get a chance to speak with you today. And most of our listeners know that I talk a lot about the Russell 2000 futures on this show because I traded specifically this year, really a very busy year, especially in the month of November, which we'll get to talking about a little bit. But what I want to do is I want to really have you break down really, I know that Russell has the 1,000 and the 2,000 and the 3,000, right? And
yes.
I know that there's Russell 1,000 futures and there's Russell 2,000 futures. Those are the ones that I trade, and I know a lot of traders listening trade those as well. Explain really the differences between the three. And actually, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the 3,000 is really just the combination of the 1 and the 2, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the Russell 1000 is our large cap index. It includes both mega cap and mid cap indexes. So generally speaking, the largest 1,000 stocks in the market as of annual reconstitution in June. And then the next 2,000 stocks comprise the small cap indexes. That was actually a Russell innovation. The Russell 2000 was launched in 1984 because at the time there was no appropriate small cap benchmark that covered, this opportunity set for small cap managers that were going outside of the large cap stocks to find their investment opportunities. So that's the genesis of the Russell 2000. And as you say, Russell 1000 plus Russell 2000 equals Russell 3000. The indexes as a whole have 9 trillion assets benchmarked. So there is a large following naturally because the Russell 1000 is the largest portion of that, about half of that 9 trillion is tracking the Russell 1000, and then is followed by mid cap as well as small cap. and then the Russell 3000 as a whole also.
Well, thanks for explaining that. And I think it's important all of our listeners know. I always say know the inside and outside of your products before you begin to trade them. It's important to know what is in those products. And one of the things that, I think a lot of traders that, they trade the S&P like myself, they trade the NASDAQ, even trade the Dow. A lot of what drives those indices, especially these days, there's really just a handful of stocks in each one. But in the Russell, it's a little bit different. And I try to explain to traders that really the Russell is not really individual names that really are the driver of it. It's the sectors. Talk to everybody a little bit about the sectors that are really the main drivers in the 1,000 and the 2,000.
Yeah. So the largest sectors in the Russell 2000 driving its performance, the absolute largest is healthcare currently, and then financials, industrials, consumer discretionary, as well as technology. Now, the Russell 1000 is primarily driven by technology. No surprise, the largest names have been technology names and, been driving the market year to date. If you look at the contribution of return by the industry, healthcare, consumer discretionary, industrials are the top contributors, followed by technology and financials, because the contribution to return is based on the performance times the weight in the index. So the Russell 1000, the primary driver has been technology, followed by industrials and consumer discretionary. This is as of through November. And, you mentioned November to remember, that was driven a lot by a lot of the optimism with the vaccines coming out. And so the Russell 2000 index, if you look at the most granular, so we have a system called the industry classification benchmark sector classification system. So at the top level is those 11 industries, and then the most granular fourth layer is called the subsector. So if you look at the subsector and dissect what's been driving the Russell 2000 index, it's led by biotechnology, banks, and software. For the Russell 1000, it's been driven primarily by software, transaction processing services, which includes companies like Visa and MasterCard, and then computer hardware.
If you were trading the Russell 2000, what symbols, or give us the things that you would pull up to look at sector-wise, you can give us individual names if you think they're important, that people should be looking at to keep an eye on as to what you would say would probably be a leader in direction for the Russell 2000?
I would say that there is a distinction within healthcare, for example. I mentioned biotechnology was a top driver. So there is a distinction between pharmaceuticals and biotechnology. So I think if you drill down into biotech versus pharma, you can see that biotech's been the driver. Actually, I just published a blog on our website, FTSERussell.com, talking about the distinction. So all the hype's been around pharmaceutical companies, but really the performance has been driven by biotechnology.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Hence, November to remember, driven obviously by these pharmaceutical companies with vaccine news. And if you could just tell the traders out there maybe what was some of the biggest drivers of that move, because I know myself as a trader, I like to look at the correlations between whether it's an individual stock name, and like we mentioned with the Russell, it could be sectors, but just something to keep an eye on that, was really a driver behind that rally. I think that's important for traders to know that.
Yeah, definitely there was a lot of optimism behind the vaccine news, and RGUS HSBT is the total return ticker for the Russell 2000 biotechnology in Bloomberg. So, that's definitely a subsector to keep an eye on.
Yeah, definitely got to keep an eye on that. And, what's interesting that I was reading about the Russell too is this number kind of stuck out at me. And it was that there's $9 trillion in assets in the Russell ecosystem.
Yes.
It's a pretty big number for small caps. Not so small, really.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. If you think about it, I guess the Russell indexes were launched back in 1984, so it's built up a following over time. Perhaps it's definitely become the small cap leader, the small cap index of choice, if you will. With I would say it does have the most assets tracking in terms of the U.S. small cap space.
Yeah, I always say that when you're looking at the U.S. economy, a lot of us traders will always say there's a major difference between the market and the economy. They don't always go together. But if you're looking for a market that best represents the U.S. economy, I would always say the Russell 2000. Do you agree?
Yeah. I would say because the smaller companies are, they're the smaller companies that are getting more of their revenues from within the U.S. They are at the forefront of innovation. For example, again, as we discussed already, the biotechnology field. We had, in September, 30 healthcare, mostly biotech IPOs were added to the Russell 2000. In December this month, we're about to add 39 IPOs to the Russell 2000. That's coming up in just about after the close of next Friday. So that's published to our website. We do regular IPO inclusions. So it's published to our website on a quarterly basis. And then in June at the annual reconstitution, we also include IPOs, and there were 6 healthcare IPOs that were added at that point. So, that was actually a pretty low number in terms of IPOs in general for the Russell reconstitution. However, as you can see from the 30 IPOs that were added in September, 39 IPOs about to be added in December, that kind of after it slowed down a little bit in the middle of the year, immediately following the beginning of the pandemic, it seems like the IPOs have resumed, and now we're on pace to add 39 after the close of next Friday.
Is that typical? I mean, it sounds like a lot of IPOs. 30, I think you said in the third quarter, 39 coming up within the next week or so. Is that typical?
Yeah, I would say generally speaking, it varies by the quarter. Obviously, there's no specific cadence. But I would say when I've looked at the past numbers, it's been in the neighborhood of 15 to 30 per quarter. So I would say, this December has been relatively high. Now, I don't know if that's the high historically, but yeah, it is, in June, it was compared to the past, a lower end, and then this December it seems to be on the higher end.
Yeah, I want to get back to the $9 trillion in assets, because it's like I said, it just stuck out to me when I was reading stats about the Russell ecosystem. And I just really am someone who believes that traders really need to keep an eye on the Russell right now because of a couple things. One is because they're heavily weighted in healthcare. We know that healthcare is going to be getting a lot, especially in the biotech, is going to be getting, I think, a lot of look by individual investors going forward because of just the climate that we're in with COVID. I mean, let's face it, it's not going away anytime soon. And I think that the Russell is taking, after what we saw in November, it's taking the bull market leadership role. And everybody looks at it as small caps. And like I said, going back to that $9 trillion number, they're small, but the very big presence. And I really want everybody to kind of just grasp that as you have the small caps versus how much do you know the S&P and NASDAQ have in assets compared to the $9 trillion in Russell?
S&P, by our own calculations, they're about even in terms of the overall S&P assets, also about $9 trillion, according to our market research team. Now, of that, their small cap's only about $100 billion. So our small cap portion being 17% of that 9 trillion, it's a much larger number than S&P has.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the Russell's the king of the small caps. I mean, that number dwarfs it. I mean, was it 9 trillion compared to what was 100 billion in S&P small caps?
Well, if you, that 9 trillion is Russell U.S. indexes as a whole, so it
As a
doesn't
whole.
include the 1,000. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you
Okay.
just look at the small cap, then it's 1.6 trillion
Yeah.
versus
Still.
100 billion for S&P's small cap. Yep.
Yeah. Much bigger number. Traders, we're going to pause for 30 seconds and we'll be right back. A question I constantly get is, what platform do I use to trade futures? Well, I use TT. They are the world's fastest commercially available futures trading platform. Learn more at tryttnow.com. RJO is a long-standing brokerage firm with personal broker relationships to help you learn and trade futures. To learn more, please visit rjofutures.com. I said that I think that the trader should be keeping an eye on the Russell for my reasonings. Talk to everybody. I mean, you know this product's better than anybody. What are the main reasons why that individual investors and traders right now, I think this time specifically, because of just what's going on in the world, that the Russell should be something, if you're not trading it, you need to be watching it?
Yep. Definitely it's more volatile than the Russell 2000. The small cap measure is more volatile than the Russell 1000. I will say that if you look at RVX, the CBOE Russell 2000 Volatility Index, it measures the market expectations and near-term volatility based on the Russell 2000 Index option prices. So you can, if you look at that measure historically, it peaked previously in 2009, leading, basically around the global financial crisis. And then similarly, it peaked this year around March, when at the beginning of the pandemic crisis. Now, it did come down a little bit since then. But yeah, certainly there's a lot of opportunity in small cap because there's more volatility. I think that gives investors an opportunity to find the, investment opportunities within that space. To outperform other investors by finding those opportunities that are going to, benefit their portfolios.
Yeah, you mentioned the RVX. Explain to everybody that maybe doesn't know what the RVX is, what it is.
It is, again, the CBOE Russell 2000 Volatility Index. It is a key measure, market expectations. So some people think of it as the VIX using the Russell 2000. So it is a volatility index, and it measures the market expectations of 30-day volatility implicit in the prices of near-term Russell 2000 options.
Well, thank you for explaining that. I think it's important if you're trading the Russell that you keep an eye on the RVX. And something that kind of feeds off of the RVX is really, I've read some of your blog posts. You've talked about factor exposures.
Yeah, so our research team did a factor analysis on the Russell 1000 and 2000 to get into what's been driving the markets this year. So they use 6 factors: momentum, value, size, quality, volatility, and yield. So what they found was the Russell 1000's been primarily driven by momentum and quality this year, a little bit by volatility. The top driver for the Russell 2000 has momentum. So, just feeding off of the RVX and the volatility, momentum's been a top driver. So, that shows that there's been a lot of volatility. And that also means a lot of opportunity for investors based on the Russell 2000.
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, I mean, the traders out there, before you go and trade these products, know what's inside the products. What are the drivers for them? What are the things you should be watching? All of these different factors, they all play a role in building your strategy for a trader. And like I said, I just think it's such an interesting time right now for the Russell. We talked about a November to remember, a record, and I think it's right now looking as though it's going to be the leader of this next leg of the bull market. And it's something that, as I've already mentioned, I think that all traders need to be watching. Whether they're trading it or not, it's going to be important. It's the closest market to the U.S. economy. And like I said, right now, they're in a leadership role to the upside. Like we were all watching NASDAQ earlier, and the NASDAQ is technology is not going away either. I mean, all of these things playing together, but I like as a trader to see different indices and when they're leading and when they're lagging. To me, it helps me. And just knowing more of what's inside these Russell products has been a tremendous help today. And, Catherine, before I let you go, talk to all the traders out there and say, look, I know that you're not trading these products, but you know these products better than anybody. Going forward, we know that healthcare, you mentioned that today, is obviously something important. Give everybody an idea of things that they should be keeping an eye out for, whether it's news or if there's any specific sectors that maybe you didn't mention today, or things that people that are trading these products should be watching.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we can't predict the future and what the markets will do, but certainly the vaccine news again drove biotechnology. But yeah, as you mentioned, there are other subsectors that have benefited in November, like banks, software, casino and gambling's in there, also medical equipment. So those are the subsectors that drove the November performance. So yeah, in general, I think there's a lot to look at the Russell 2000 to understand the markets and what they are doing and what the drivers are. And so looking at the industries like healthcare or subsectors like, again, biotechnology versus pharmaceuticals, and then banks, getting down to the more granular elements of the indexes may be helpful.
Before I let you go, do you know in order what were the biggest drivers of that 18% move higher in the Russell 2000 sector by sector, maybe just the top three?
Yeah, the sectors that led in terms of performance, actually energy was the top performing industry, followed by, so it's interesting because, I've been talking about contribution to return, again, going back to the weight times, the combination of the weight and the performance.
Yeah.
But if you look at just the performance of those top industries, energy was the top performer, technology was the top performer, the second best performer, followed by consumer discretionary. So in terms of healthcare, it's in the middle. I mean, it's still up a lot, more than 15%, but it's the weight that contributed to the return of the overall index. Yeah.
Interesting. It's interesting to me that energy was the leader. Healthcare was the biggest driver because of the weighting, and it was up a lot. That's why the vaccine news had the biggest impact. But you have other sectors. This is why I like having these conversations, because to me that was interesting. I would have never guessed that energy would have been the top leader in that move higher in Russell. But that's why we have conversations like this with you, Catherine, to teach us more about these indices. And Catherine, before I let you go, you write a blog post. You write multiple blog posts. Can you tell everybody where people can go to learn more about some of the things that you are writing about?
Yes, FTSERussell.com, FTSERussell.com/blogs. So there you can find all the blogs, not just the ones I publish, but also from our research team. They publish regularly on, market drivers and sentiment and, what's to come potentially based on the data. So that's a good place to look, FTSERussell.com/blogs.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. And that's how I got some of the things that I brought to today's conversation, by going and reading those blogs. And because, like I said, if you're a trader and you're trading these products, you got to know what's inside them. You got to know what's driving them. It's more than just knowing the charts. You have to also know what charts to look at. And Catherine, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. Learned a lot. And thank you for coming on Futures Radio Show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for listening to Futures Radio Show. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review on iTunes. You can listen to all of our episodes on futuresradioshow.com, iTunes, YouTube, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher.